Okay, there we go. It's official. Good morning. It is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you, to be the first to welcome you to CaliCon. My name is Tamara Lawson. I'm the Tony Rimby Dean of the School of Law at the University of Washington. It is our great pleasure to host you. I was talking to some of the leaders here and learning that we hosted you 20 years ago in 2004, and we're so grateful that you're here again at this important time, such an important time in our legal education. And we were even reminiscing about how the origins of Cali were so innovative and forward-looking at the time. And when you think about where Cali started in technology and education and where we are today, I just really applaud all of you for the work that you've done, because you were pioneers before people understood that legal education could be connected with technology in the innovative ways that it is. And you're bringing legal education to students in such important ways and leveling the playing field for access to the material for everyone. So I just really applaud the deep commitment to this work that everyone in this room and everyone who's, I guess, listening to the recordings and virtually connecting to us has done in this effort. I want to thank everyone who has put this conference together. I know it's a labor of love to do this type of service work, and everyone in our university that has put the nice refreshments, make sure you have everything you need, and we'll be hosting you and very attentive this whole time. I'm excited to hear all the innovation that you're working on, particularly as the ABA is moving to embrace technology and curriculum delivery. And I just think this is the beginning of so much more for everyone and all of us to collaborate. I don't want to take up too much time. I'm a big fan. I'm a fangirl. I'll be here in and out of all of your sessions. And so I just applaud your work and welcome.
I'm on this mic, right? Yes, I am. So, wait a minute. Isn't that what kids do? Welcome to the 34th Conference for Law School Computing. No, Conference for Law School Computing. No, CaliCon 24. It's gone through some changes. My name is John Mayer. I'm the executive director of Cali, and this is my 30th year with Cali. And we were, and the dean is right, we were here 20 years ago. We got started way back in 1991. Actually, it was called the Conference for Law School Computing Professionals. And I'll admit that was aspirational. There were no professionals working in computing at the time, including myself. But we wanted to say that tech has a role in legal education more than just a tool that's in the background or capabilities. It brings its own sort of way of changing the delivery and attacking the problems that we want to solve. All right. So we've had conferences all through the years, but 20 years ago was what the brochure looked like for here. And this deserves a little bit of nerdy explanation, I guess, right? Obviously, we were riffing on Lord of the Rings, which in 2001 came out with the second movie in 2002 and the third movie in 2003. There and back again, how many people don't know what that phrase means? Well, let me put it this way. How many people know what that means in terms of Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit? Oh, man, I've got a nerd crowd. All right, yeah. So, matter of fact, The Hobbit was called The Hobbit. It was called There and Back Again, right? Was that right in the title? Now that I've completely forgotten. But our thought was because, because ALL was in Seattle the previous year, and this Lord of the Rings thing was something that we could hitch our wagon to and get some interest in, we would theme the conference There and Back Again. And we almost put the theme to this conference as There and Back Again and Again, or something along those lines. But we resisted that. At that conference, Clay Shirky gave a great talk, and the only way I was able to afford having Clay Shirky talk was he hadn't published any of his books yet. I will leave that non-contextual slide up for you to, if you want to go and watch his talk. And trust me, it's an interesting talk even today. It's up on our YouTube channel. Eat more lard. Message from the Lard Council. Our other keynote speaker was from Microsoft, and he came in with a camera around his neck and said, in the near future, we're going to be recording everything all the time and streaming it and using that information to interact with society. And here it is 20 years later, and we're all pissed off at Microsoft because they're going to take pictures of of everything going on our screens and selling it to the marketers and things like that, right? So weird. All right. So that year, I made some predictions about where law schools or legal education would be in 2013, 10 years from then. And I thought it was interesting to revisit some of those and to give myself a grade. So I said that, in 2013, we're all going to have notebook, PDA, cell phone, GPS, camera, MP3 players. Nailed it. Because in a few years after that, the iPhone came out, and we did have almost all those things all in a single smartphone-like device. So, okay, I wasn't the only one who was predicting that. It wasn't that hard in 2003 to see where it was going, but I'm going to take credit for it. All right. How about students will record everything? I watched that Microsoft talk. I thought, yeah, as long as we're all walking around with a camera, students will record their classes so they can refer back to their notes, or they can send it to some transcription software. And, I think that's a swing and a miss, zing. Students don't record everything. They don't even show up sometimes, right? All right. So faculty will record everything, and then they'll just use their recordings of themselves lecturing, sort of like a sports reel highlight. I thought, if you've got all the video of everything that you've ever taught, it's going to be easy to just do, and here's where I talk about this, here's where I talk about this, and that was another swing and a miss. The next one I said was that the PC would be like an office, would be like a TV studio for production of student materials, teaching and student questions. And the short answer is that's sort of what happened during the pandemic, is faculty even posted pictures of, here's my setup with 19 screens, and using Zoom, of course, as the driver for that. But the pandemic was in 2020. I predicted this in 2013. So it's really, it took a lot longer than we expected. I said that all computers will have built-in projectors so that classrooms won't need any special infrastructure. Yeah, swing and a miss. I said that law school IT will diminish. I was getting edgy here. to basically install and update and caretaker status. And even though it was 2003 and I was predicting that for 2013, I kind of think I called it. Law school IT has diminished, or it's become more distributed into the main campus of the university, or into outsourcing or things like that. There are many fewer programmers. There are many fewer development systems or development of new technology going on in law schools. And I said Cali will become more distributed and less centralized. And I kind of think that's what was obvious, because we hadn't quite put everything up on the cloud at that point, but we could see where that was going. In 2004, we launched this idea called Codec Cali. How clever. Consortium for Distance Education, Cali, where we thought that if everybody's going to be recording all these classes, well, then maybe they could sell them to each other. And so if you don't have a environmental law professor in your school, you could buy that professor's videos in some sort of administrative level marketplace, which is what the idea was behind Codec. It took us 13 years to publish a book on best practices on distance learning, because that what I just described didn't happen, right? And of course, everything all changed when the pandemic happened. Nobody, we can't do this distance learning. It's too hard. Oh, let's all do distance learning right now. Became simple, right? So in 2004, that's what this is. I used to throw up lots of graphs at Cali meetings, right? We had 185 members. We have 998 now. We had 350 lessons. We got over 1,300 now. And we were distributing 50,000 CDs a year. So, AOL, suck it. Because this was before everybody had the internet and before everybody was ubiquitously connected and things like that. So I know we sort of stole the ideas from Lord of the Rings, and and we're riffing off of Seattle, but today we're here for a different reason, right? CaliCon 24, exploring the unknown unknowns of legal ed and legal tech. And no, we're not trying to riff off of that guy who was in the government, but rather that this is a particularly weird time in the world and in legal education. I leave that as let's do some interaction. Why is it a particularly weird time in legal education? Anybody want to toss out the first one? Of course, AI. We don't know how that's going to affect what we're doing. We don't know if we're being sold a bill of goods. We can see that it does some kind of cool things, right? But we don't know. What's another thing? Yes. The next gen bar exam. More and more states are signing up. How is that going to have a redounding effect on the way we teach law? Are we going to continue to do vertical courses towards contracts, constitutional law, or are we going to do law practice, which has elements in it all the way across? I don't know. I asked a Gen AI image thing to say, show me Seattle in 2034. And what does it do? It basically says, well, Seattle, Space Needle, right? 2034, kind of, cool turquoise and cerulean, things like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's AI, derivative. It must always extrapolate from what it was trained on. And so I decided to include it because it was, to me, not so much an indictment, but an example of, we don't know what AI is going to generate except by what we've fed it, right? And that leads into a slide, and this is not a slide for now because it's in the closing plenary slide, in which I'm going to ask you to help Cali figure out what we should be doing in the future. And these are some of the essential questions that I came up with. What does legal education need today? Stop talking about the past, John. Stop thinking about how we used to do things. What's the world that we're going to have to figure out today? And I'm asking you, because you work at law schools, and you may think, I'm way down the totem pole, but you're not, because you're part of the solution. And that was what we felt in 1991 when we started the conference. We're doing this tech stuff. We're part of the solution, and we want to tackle the tough and interesting problems with this cool new technology. So what should law schools do together with tech that they can't do individually? There's a lot of, I did this thing here, I did this thing here. Maybe we should be working so that we're not duplicating the work. And that's almost essentially what Cali is about, right? We try to do things that no individual law school could accomplish on its own because the diminishment of your IT staff, right? What do you want to do? What do you want to do with your career? I've made a career of working in this space. Elmer's made a career of working in this space. Deb has made a career of working in space. We've got a lot of people at Cali, and a lot of you, how many of you have been working in your job for more than 20 years? Got a few, more than 15 years. Keep your hands up if you're over that. More than 10 years. It's quite a bit, more than 5. All right. It is a place where people land and stay. It is a profession, all right? Wait, I had one more on there, didn't I? What are we, the legal ed system, faculty, lawyers, what are we missing? That's the unknown unknowns. What are we forgetting when we implement technologies that we don't fully understand or that we can't trust or things like that? All right. So of necessity, I have thank yous. I have people I have to thank. Of course, the University of Washington. I must thank them for bringing us back again. I guess we didn't leave the place, like the Who, too smashed up. And especially want to thank Carla Whale, who is on our board of directors. Thank you, Carla, who made this happen. I want to thank our sponsors, National Society for Legal Technology, Integrity, Scholarship, and of course, the Free Law Movement, Tim Stanley, for their sponsorship of this conference. Thanks, guys, ladies. Please do visit their tables. Please talk to them. I hope they're in the room. When we decided to have sponsors at this conference, we didn't want just to have them out there and maybe you can safely ignore them, because we view the sponsors as part of the community as well. If they figure out how to create products that make sense to us, then they have to talk to us. They have to learn. They have to know. And so they really should be in the room during the presentations and during the conference, not apart from it or separate from it. All right. I want to thank my board of directors. They're all volunteers. They don't get paid anything. And they're meeting on Saturday. We're having a strategic planning retreat, which, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to come out of it. And that's why the closing plenary is going to be a session in which we're going to try to have you help us a little bit on envisioning Cali in the future. I want to thank the speakers, right? We designed the conference in a way that lets people who normally don't get to speak, right? Our bar for if you want to speak is fairly low. And I don't mean that we let any crap in, but I do mean it's easy for people to come up with a good idea, because basically you all are doing things. You have experience and knowledge. We want you to share that. And if you're a little nervous, if you're a little bit of an introvert, I'm sort of an occasional introvert. My first conference, my first Cali conference, I gave a presentation about a networking tool that let people chat with each other online. And the way we did it was we had a room full of computers, and they were all going to chat with each other online in the room full of computers. And it ran on Novell NetWare. It was a variation of the software called Mustang BBS. And a few of you are going, oh, wow, that's old. And the minute we launched it, it crashed the network. And so I was flop sweating like you wouldn't believe. But anyhow, speakers. So this is an opportunity for speakers. Be kind to them, show them appreciation. They're here sharing their experiences and their knowledge, and we appreciate that. And they're getting better at it so that next year they can do that again. All right. This is actually from last year, but I think I did some of this. So how many of you this is the first Cali conference, CaliCon you've ever been to? About 15–20%. Very good. Thanks for coming. How many of you are in the, let's say 2 to 10? The great majority. All right. How many more than 10? Oh, another big bunch. All right. Thanks. Cool. So got some housekeeping. If you didn't notice, these are the Wi-Fi numbers. If you want to take a picture of that, I'll keep blabbing or take a sip of my coffee. The network is obviously University of Washington. The net ID is event0618, all small. The password is CaliCon, CALIC capital ON 24 bang. And there will be no problems with that network, I am assured, from the tech folks. What, did I get it wrong? Oh, good. I might have transcribed it wrong. There's going to be a tour today only at 12 noon. So you get a half hour to slam down some lunch and then run over to the registration where the stairs that go down to the library. And it will be a combination tour of the library and technology. Interestingly, this used to be a big deal. We used to have like almost the whole conference would go on the tours. It was a classic busman's holiday sort of situation. And that's because we started the conference by having the first one at the old Chicago Kent building and then the second one in the new Chicago Kent building, and people wanted to see, well, what are you doing in the classrooms and how are you wiring and and of course there was no Wi-Fi at the time. There haven't been, in matter of fact, most of the visits that we've made with the conference to other schools have been brand new law school buildings, which this was in 2004. That's not so much true. There haven't been too many new law school buildings built in the last 5 or 10 years, right? Any of you built a new building that we should know about? Because Santa Clara, huh? Maybe we're going to be in Santa Clara in a couple of years. All right. Yeah.
The password is CaliCon 2024.
CaliCon 2024, bang. Ignore that. I transcribed it wrong. Blame John. That's why I'm wearing the tie. All right. The session from bricks to clicks, preparing law students for virtual law firms. The session is still going on, but that part of the session, the speaker is not going to be able to make it. The other half of that is if the speaker is in the room, incorporating experiential learning into almost any course. Yeah, we need you to like stretch it out a little bit, okay? All right, the mics are hot. So Tom Bruce is out there recording everything and incorporating it into his Twitch stream. Be very careful. Tom Bruce was the other founder of this conference. I had to at least include one picture of him. And we're having a raffle on Friday. We used to do this to bribe you to visit the sponsors, and now it's just kind of an awfully fun thing to do. You do not have to be present to win. Cali staff and board and sponsors are not eligible. Sorry. But the raffle's got a lot of cool stuff, right? We're giving away tactical flashlights and first aid kits. I have this fetish for like survivor wear. I don't know what it is. Screwdrivers and food kitchen scales. A Star Wars Black Series Darth Vader Force FX Elite lightsaber with advanced LED. I mean, not one of those cheap knockoffs. This is like, a real lightsaber-ish sort of thing. Interactive Go Cube, which is sort of like, well, you can see what it is, right? And a couple of cosmic galaxy lollipops, where the lollipops look like galaxies, or planet lollipops. And I think Pluto is included. So, yeah, exactly. And a whole bunch of gift cards sponsored by the Free Law Society folks and Tim Stanley. Thank you very much, Tim, for that generosity. All right. On Thursday, we're having a reception in which we get to say goodbye to Deb Quintel, who is retiring from Cali after. We searched high and low for a picture of you in a Cali wear. I'm glad you made me laugh because I want to cry a little bit, Deb, because I'm going to miss you terrible. She's been with Cali for so long. She has helped us publish so many lessons. She has interacted with so many faculty. She has been more than a spine and a backbone and a brain, a friend, an inspiration. And we wouldn't be here without her. We just simply would not be here without her. So on Thursday, we're going to. Oh, you don't know, do you? So on Thursday tonight at the reception, we'll be lifting a glass and be sure to go up to Deb and have her tell you a story or two. All right. Except the ones I paid you to always forget, right? Oh, yeah, I want to hear Deb's stories. I want to hear Deb's stories. All right. So here we are, CaliCon 24. We've got a keynote speaker, David Colarusso. You know, and I always have to do like a little intro, maybe a little bio, and I'm like, oh man, I so admire the work that David is doing, and there was so much about that I want to tell you about, but really you should just go to his website and learn as much as you can about him. But I have to say something, and then I thought, wait a minute, this is the age of AI. There's better people than me who could say something about David. So I went to a cheap rip-off website and I got David Attenborough to do the bio.
David Colarusso is the director of Suffolk University Law School's Legal Innovation and Technology Lab. He has worked as a public defender, data scientist, software engineer, and high school physics teacher. He is the author of A Programming Language for Lawyers, Q&A Markup, an award-winning legal hacker, ABA Legal Rebel, and Fast Case 50 honoree.
It actually goes on for another 45 minutes. It's a full documentary of the genus, phylum, and heritage that is David Colarusso. So I'll pause it there and just say that I'm so delighted to have him as our keynote. And please give him a warm welcome.
All right. So something occurred to me as I was listening to John's comments. First off is that I'll just give you a warning. Don't worry, it's going to end in a good place, but it might be a little bit of a wild ride. When I accepted John's request to speak here today, a sentence in his reply lit a fuse. It read simply, "You need not be constrained in any way." Wow. You need not be constrained in any way. Well, my thoughts immediately turned to the most subversive thing I could possibly do, given the chance to speak to a room full of JDs and associates. The one line that I usually skate right up to, but dare not cross. Today, however, I am not constrained. Today, there will be math. The attorney John Todd Stewart once told a story about a law partner of his, a man that would later come to gain some historical note. Here is a dramatic reading. "A few days later, I found him already in the office and deeply engaged when I arrived. This was unusual, for I almost invariably preceded him. He was sitting at the table, and spread out before him lay a quantity of blank paper, large, heavy sheets, a compass, a rule, numerals, pencils, several bottles of ink in various colors, and a profusion of stationery and writing appliances generally. He had evidently been struggling with a calculation of some magnitude, for scattered about were sheet after sheet of paper, covered with an unusual array of figures. He was so deeply absorbed in study, he scarcely looked up when I entered. I confess, I wondered what he was doing and what had occasioned his profound application at the office so early in the morning. Nor was my curiosity allied till a later hour in the day when he arose from his chair, apparently headed for the courthouse. It was then that he enlightened me by announcing that he was trying to solve the difficult problem of squaring the circle. In a short time, he returned to the office and resumed his study. For the better part of the succeeding 2 days, he continued to sit there, engrossed in that difficult, if not undemonstrable proposition, and labored, as I thought, almost to the point of exhaustion. He talked but little about it to me or to others, so far as I could observe. But it was evident he was toiling with all his might. Now, since that toiling occurred, mathematicians have proven that one cannot square the circle. In fact, it has become a euphemism for attempting the impossible. At the time, however, it was but a difficult, unanswered question, the sort of thing a precocious lawyer might work on between court appearances. I see some of you with quizzical looks on your faces, trying to remember what is it to square the circle? So a brief refresher. And trust me when I say this is not a digression. We will eventually come full circle, as it were. Oh, the jokes will just keep coming too. Squaring the circle is a challenge in which one is tasked with the creation of a very particular square, a square whose area is equal to that of a given circle. Oh, you say, this is the math, I got this. The area of a circle is pi r squared, and the area of a square is just one side times the other, so x squared here. To make things easy, I'll go ahead and let's make the circle radius 1, meaning its area is going to be pi because 1 squared is 1. And we remember that algebra translate roughly to reduce and rearrange, so anything we do to both sides does not change the truth of a statement and only serves to rearrange things. Meaning we can take the square root of both sides, revealing that all we have to do is make a square with sides equal to the square root of pi for our square, that is. The trick to squaring the circle, however, is that you are limited in your tools. Given only a compass and a straight edge, you must construct a circle and then this special square. That is the problem our young law partner was toiling on for 2 days, nearly to the point of exhaustion. And that law partner's name was Abraham Lincoln. Patent clerk, but close. And I think he has a lot to teach us. Math is much more than addition and subtraction, multiplication and division. In the same way that law is more than statutes and precedent. It, like the law, is a way of thinking. And what is it we're always saying about what law school does? It teaches you to think like a lawyer. I didn't even have to do much of a prompt. That was great. As Doris Kearns Goodwin noted in Team of Rivals, the time Lincoln spent engrossed in study while living life on the circuit provided him with the time he needed to remedy his want of education that he regretted all his life. So when we hear that Lincoln, the autodidact's autodidact, was teaching himself Euclid as a young lawyer, I think it's fair to say he considered it part of what it meant to think like a lawyer. And who are we to argue with Lincoln? Now, as you might have noted from my introduction, my professional career has concerned itself both with the laws of nature and those of people. Since Lincoln's time, it has become more and more fashionable to draw a sharp line between the two. That is a mistake. In 1959, C.P. Snow spoke of two cultures, science and the humanities. He saw that this division as a major obstacle standing in the way of solving many of the world's most pressing problems. Largely a critique of the British educational system at the time, the point comes across in this often quoted passage. Again, a dramatic reading. This is just so much fun. I'm not constrained in any way. A good many times, I have been present at gatherings of people who, by the standards of the traditional culture, are thought highly educated and who have with considerable gusto, been expressing with incredulity the illiteracy of scientists. Once or twice I have been provoked and have asked the company how many of them could describe the second law of thermodynamics. The response was cold. It's kind of a joke with the thermodynamics thing. Anyhow, it was also negative. Yet I was asking something which was the scientific equivalent of, have you read a work of Shakespeare? Ouch. Snow wondered how political leaders would navigate an increasingly technical world absent a foundational understanding of the science underpinning that world. Today, perhaps he would deride legislators throwing snowballs in the Senate, pointing to weather as a refutation of climate change. Technology does seem to be eating the world, so much so that today we see a sort of mirror image of Snow's argument. It too acknowledges the gulf between two cultures. However, it casts aspersions from the other side. They ask, how can technologists be trusted with the power to wield their tools when they lack even the most basic understanding of human nature? Good old Dr. Malcolm there. My favorite encapsulation of this is the rhetorical framing that asks, how is it so many technical types mistake the warnings of speculative fiction for how-to guides? Enter the torment nexus. Sci-fi author. In my book, I invented the torment nexus as a cautionary tale. Tech company. At long last, we have created the torment nexus from classic sci-fi novel. Don't create the torment nexus. did these engineers ever take a class in literature, ethics, history? Now look. Now look at what they've wrought. Now don't mistake my tone. It might sound funny, but if you like dressing up as a stormtrooper or wielding an evil lightsaber, just because they're cool, I have news for you. Big on the metaverse? Well, it's worth remembering that cyberpunk was actually punk. And the corporations were not the good guys. Also, dinosaurs are cool, but this is not an endorsement of de-extinction. As Daedalus understood, we must be constantly vigilant to avoid both complacency and hubris when using the power of technology. As we face the unfolding of an unknown world created in part by new possibilities enabled by AI, both for good and ill, I am buoyed to hear calls for the importance of the humanities and liberal arts. But I fear too often it is forgotten that the natural and formal sciences are part of the liberal arts. The choice between the sciences and humanities is a false dichotomy. The answer is, and always has been, the liberal arts. But we all say we want to work with interdisciplinary teams, yet we hold the others at arm's length, refusing to engage with their most basic tenets. Today, I am unconstrained. I need not pretend a chasm exists between the two cultures. Rather, in the spirit of Stephen Jay Gould, I embrace a third culture, and one that bridges the two. I also think this is probably the best room of law and law-adjacent folks for me to have this little experiment. But I just want people to remember that the liberal arts means free, as in the Latin liberalis. Pronunciation's crap. It is, of course, a study intended to provide free people the means to participate in civic life. Lincoln knew that, and we would do well to remember it ourselves. Today and tomorrow, we're concerning ourselves with the unknown unknowns of legal education and technology. Here be dragons. Though it may be appropriate to say, here be AI dragons. That, after all, is the sort of unstated assumption, or even stated actually this morning, behind much of what we're going to talk about. So what I'm going to do in the rest of my time is talk in two parts. First, we're going to look at what is the sphere about our AI-infused unknown, and what can we do about it. So I struggled with this framing, wishing I could escape the focus of fear, but my day-to-day experience makes this impossible. Just last month, I found myself reviewing legislative hearings on one of the multiple AI bills working its way through state legislatures. The bill aims to oversee the operation of so-called frontier models, seeing in them both great promise and great peril. The bill is, I assume, a well-meaning attempt to prevent the company, any company based in this jurisdiction, from birthing Skynet. Now, in case you mistake my tone, my intention is to be equal parts sort of playful and provocative throughout this talk. In an impassioned statement, one of the sponsors pointed to the fact that AI had recently discovered tens of thousands of potential chemical weapons. This was used to undermine how urgently action was needed. Problem is, the AI that made that discovery would not have been covered by the legislator's own bill, because it wasn't the right type of AI. Now, I have a hard time knowing what to make of such incoherent regulatory attempts, though the presence of industry supporters did make me wonder if maybe they were trying to, erect a moat that would make it hard for competitors, but that they could do with. The point is, not only is this regulation motivated by fear of the unknown future, it is motivated by a fear of an unknown present. If you're worried about some technology, and you think it's so dangerous that you have to regulate it, you cite the production of another technology that you aren't trying to regulate, I have to ask why. I'm not really sure what to say. Maybe you're saying that is bad and this promises to be much, much worse. But my suspicion is that maybe you don't understand what you mean by AI. So it's fear of the unknown all the way down. Now, 3 years ago, if someone was talking about AI, chances are they were talking about machine learning. Oh, back when Twitter was a thing. Here's a 2017 tweet from Amy Hoy. It says, by today's definition, y equals mx plus b is an artificial intelligence bot that can tell you where a line is going. It's funny because it's true. What a time. If someone said AI hallucinations, everyone, go on this is what came to mind, right? Today, AI means large language models, or perhaps more inclusively, generative AI. The EU recently found itself dealing with a shift in usage, having spent years working on a comprehensive AI Act, and they were all but ready to sign it into law when Gen AI entered the scene. And then suddenly they found themselves with a would-be AI law that overnight didn't explicitly mention the tech everyone thought of when they said AI. If we're to understand our fear of AI, we should probably have some general understanding of what we're talking about. So to that end, we're going to just talk about these things as prediction machines. Machine learning predicts models predict numbers on a continuous line, or categorize something, some group that it belongs to, while large language models or small language models like this one on your phone, although it's pretty large up on that screen, predict the next word. At their base, though, they include some model of the world. Given X, Y is true, or Z will happen, some variation in that thing. Ultimately, however, they are mathematical functions. One creates a numeric representation of the world, runs it through these functions, looks at the output, uses those for predictions. And this raises the first objection that I usually hear about AI, which is you can't measure that with math. I do not believe your functions can account for everything. Your model will always be wrong. Yes. I'm not sure, however, that's the takedown its proponents take it to be. Many years ago, when I worked as a data scientist for the Public Defender's Agency, which is why I didn't get to raise my hand for as long as other people, because I've been switching around careers so much. I promised myself that this slide would make an appearance in all my machine learning talks. Well, not this slide, but this one. It's a quote from the statistician George Box talking about statistical models. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. It's a statement about not mistaking the map for the territory. Maps don't tell us everything about their subjects. They have a limited resolution, and so in some respects they are wrong. Our functions can't account for everything, but that doesn't mean they can't be useful. I take from Box's quote, 2 general rules. A model's output should start, not end a discussion, and always ask compared to what. I think these rules provide a reasonably robust framework for addressing the first fear, resulting in a case-by-case balancing test. Sometimes our models will work, sometimes they won't, but we ask that you measure them against the alternative, not the almighty. A good number of folks fear the first rule will be broken. They somehow they worry about these flawed models having the last word. In short, they fear we will become too reliant on these tools. This is undoubtedly true. The research of automation bias tells us as much. And there's also ample reason to worry about this, because we know that bias data will be perpetuated by these models if it's in its training data, and maybe even exacerbated in their outcomes. Others, however, fear the second rule will be violated. In the negative, they worry that folks will embrace shiny new tech without asking what it really has to offer and at what cost. In the positive, rule 2 folks worry about a fear of the unknown, causing people to judge these models against perfection, not the existing flawed alternative. They worry about provincialism. They know that a choice to do nothing is a choice, and a choice for the status quo at that. And the status is not quo. I played with thinking about the Dr. Horrible thing. I didn't, people would, whatever. If these were the discussions we were having about AI, I wouldn't be so worried. Given time, society would find a way to negotiate competing interests. We'd get folks to follow the rules. They'd start discussion, not end discussion, the outputs of these models, and we'd always ask compared to what. There is a third, more ephemeral constellation of fears at play here. Fears somehow related to what these tools say about our place in the world. Fears motivated, like our legislators, by an imagined possible fear. Fears based on the imagined unknowns of the unknown unknowns. John really gave us a great topic here. This is the fear of AI as a class of tools, independent any specific use case. There are tests coming up. Oh, wow, that landed a lot harder than I thought it was gonna. So Dune, the reason they don't have robots is because there was this thing that the humans fought off all the robots and got rid of them. All right. Well, spoiler alert here too. Paul Atreides. You should read the rest of the books. Because again, you might not want to copy him. Okay. This is actually a pretty perfect segue into what I fear so much about these nebulous fears. I worry that our inability to name and define these fears risks moving us, making us vulnerable to hucksters and charlatans and charismatic leaders. Folks who, at the end of the day, don't have our best interests in heart. Sophisticated actors see this time for what it is, a time of disruption. And they're taking it as an opportunity to sort of renegotiate things that we thought had been around and we were relying on for a long time. Anecdotally, at least, I found that one's fear of AI seems to bear a connection to how precarious their life feels. For the most precarious, fear of those in power breaking rule number 1 looms large. As you increase in security, folks who start to worry more about the violation of rule 2 in a sort of slide towards provincialism, that increases. And really interestingly, the most secure among us, they incidentally seem to feel the most precarious. They literally worry about robots rising up to kill their masters. Which is my cue to remind folks the very first robot story is that of a labor rebellion, or arguably a slave revolt, because the term robot derives from a Czech word that roughly translates to forced labor. And it shares a root with the word for slave. And in the story, Rosam's Universal Robots, the robots were literally artificial people subject to forced labor. So I'm just going to leave that one there. So I'd like to examine a few case studies, lightly sprinkled with some math, and see if we can get at what's behind this hidden fear. So let's consider AI art. Now, it's now possible to make images like this. I did this one a couple of years ago with a prompt, a good oil painting of a cute robot under a tree in autumn. That was my first one. And then did some others. And I did this all with a open source software called Stable Diffusion. The pace of technological development here is making people really ask, what is this good for? What's going on with these things? And it's a particularly charged discussion because people know that these images are created with tools trained on copyrighted works of human artists, and that as a rule, these artists did not consent to such use. The implication of that critique is that there's got to be something wrong. It's got to be copyright, right? The word theft is used with some frequency. Traditionally, however, in order to implicate copyright, there has to be some copying going on. So it's worth asking, where are the copies? Here's okay. To get an idea where they may live, where those copies are, we can use some math. And don't worry, it's not the hard math of diffusion model. I'm talking simple math, division and multiplication. So the model I downloaded was about 5 gigabytes. We know these things were trained, the Stable Diffusion, the one I used, was trained on about 2.3 billion images. That's a lot of images. We know that there are 8 billion bits in a gigabyte. So that comes to like 17 bits per image. 17 bits with a B. It's like billion, but like it's big, this is like small. Unconstrained. For context, a single color pixel on the above image, a single pixel requires probably at least 24 bits. So I want you to think about this. I want you to think really hard. There is less information per image on average in the model than required to specify a single pixel on the screen. Whatever is stored in that model, it is not a database of images. There's simply not enough space. The images produced by the model are not collages stitched together from existing images. There's something much, much weirder. Now, of course, 17 bits is on average. You could have something in the training data multiple times to get more space. My point is that this doesn't, not that this means that these can't be violations of copyright, but that their existence isn't in itself a per se evidence of violation, which is an important point. because this technology is going to be really disruptive. And we need to figure out how to deal with it. But I think we should figure out how to deal with it based upon what our real issues are, not upon what our first thought of the issues might be. And to show my cards, I don't think this is copyright. I think it's probably antitrust or labor law. But the absence of actual copies suggests that things are more complicated than maybe we might have originally thought. And if your objection is based on something other, if your objection is based on something other than copying, then we better help identify what the real source of that objection is. Otherwise, we risk fighting the wrong battle. This is where I will point out the enemy of your enemy is not always your friend. Having lived through the 90s and early aughts, you cannot convince me that the music industry and major publishing houses getting what they want in a copyright fight is somehow good for the little guy. Yeah. So what I want to do to help us think this through, let's revisit the Turing test. Classic formulation, 2 rooms, person in one, software in another, connect them with teletype. If you can't tell the difference between them, the software wins. What does that mean? Philosophically, I don't know. Practically, it just means we're going to treat them both like a person. So I'm going to suggest a variation on that. I'm going to call it Turing's test of liability. So the Turing test of liability, at the level of individual outputs, if you have no reason to question the legality of a person in a room producing some output given a certain set of inputs, including those needed for training and learning, there's no reason to question the legality of a piece of software that produces such an output given the same inputs. Got to workshop that, but you get the idea. This is not to say that the use of such software can't lead to liability, only that the theory of liability should be based on how the software actually interacts with the world. So it's important to remember both our person and our software are capable of producing infringing content. If you ask them to produce a copy of something, some protected work, and they do, that's the copy that I think should trigger IP protection, not some imagined copy. Now, if the software came out and actually had databases of images, that'd be a different question. But the point is the details actually matter. Except for very limited cases, we don't let folks protect things like artistic style. It doesn't matter if you produce a work inspired by someone else's work. We've considered a world where the author of IP can control every potentially inspired work, and we've rejected that world, at least in our legal system. Surprise, surprise, there are some who would like to renegotiate this agreement. They say, oh, we see these tools, they make things that look like someone else's work. We know they use someone else's work to sort of train themselves, so that there must be a violation. But again, I don't think it's copyright, at least not as it currently exists. And that's okay, we're living in novel times. It makes sense that we will encounter novel issues. So what's actually different about the output from our 2 boxes? Speed. Speed is the difference, right? Which translates into scale, which means big. That's big data. Put it with the courthouse, it's big data and the law. I had a lot of fun making that slide. Anyhow, for a given amount of time, one room can take in a lot of inputs and produce a lot more outputs. So the harm, as it were, of these things is their unrelenting efficiency. From a collection of people, not a single person. Okay, so this is where, in my opinion, the new liability should attach. The person in the room can and let's just remember, a person in a room can access the contents of the web. She can make local copies of others' work in order to study them on her own computer. She can even use her interpretation of these ephemeral copies to produce works that resemble the originals in style. And importantly, she can then take those and offer her work based on that of others, inspired by that of others, for sale. If we say that a person cannot use a computer to do the same, it is in a meaningful sense a new restriction. We should be forced to face this fact before trying to retrofit existing law to address these actions. Of course, the use by our person in the room did involve making a copy, albeit ephemeral. The right to read is, sort of where we get that, and it's something that sort of comes out of fair use. And in some sense, every image you view on the web is a copy stored on your device, and that's okay. I'm not going to go down a whole fair use rabbit hole. Just remember, we got these 4 factors, right? Sort of purpose and character, nature of the copyright, amount, substantiality, and market impact. And if there's a weakness here for Gen AI, I think it might be in this 4th factor. The court might distinguish between the two, say, yes, this copying would be okay if a person did it, but there's just so much. Anyone remember Aereo? I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing it right, because I've never actually heard someone say it, but you know, AEREO. They were this company that rented out TV antennas, right? They'd have this server rack somewhere in a major media market with these chips on them with little TV antennas, and you could access your TV antenna and watch live broadcast TV. And so their view was they were just renting antenna with a really long cord. The American Broadcasting Company did not see it that way, nor did the courts. They sided with Aereo, saying that it looked like they were acting like a community antenna television by providing a performance of the relevant works. It didn't matter that Aereo's users had their own antennas with really long cables, because in aggregate, they provided something that looked to the court like a performance. Turns out your right to access free broadcast television using your own antenna is not absolute. Never forget, everything is both more complicated and less complicated than you assume. I felt like I'm going to start a new quote thing with that. I'm really happy with that one. If there's a weakness of Gen A's there for use, my money is on this fourth factor. So now you see why I had Turing's law of liability starts at the level of individual outputs. Now, this provides an interesting thought experiment, though. If we get to the point where we say these Gen AI can't do this ephemeral copying because it's so big, what if an art school correctly makes use of fair use to share the works of an emerging style of art? As part of their course, the students must visit and view some selected works made available by the works authors on the web. And eventually, it turns out the graduates of the school start to produce voluminous amounts of art in this new style. At what point is the school's graduating class big enough to warrant the same treatment as a diffusion model under this new interpretation of the fourth factor? Make no mistake, grounded as it would be in the existing four-factor analysis, invalidating the right to read, even if aimed at machines, would be a new restriction. Let's assume that we address the concerns of copyright holders by producing a mandatory licensing regime. If we can show that a model was trained on some content, we'll mandate that a fraction of any profits from the model are made to the author of the content. How long do you think it will be for someone to suggest that we apply that same regime to the output of human artists who were influenced by others? I say 5 years tops. That's my guess. Since an inspiration tax doesn't sound to me like it's aimed at promoting the progress of science and the useful arts. If we're going to make new rules for a new world, all I ask is that we're honest. Let's not pretend any of us know what the right answer is, or that existing structures will be sufficient. Now, I spent a lot of time recently playing very publicly with large language models. And so I had people talking to me from all sorts of ends. I feel like that old George Carlin sketch where, you know, have you ever noticed you're driving down the road, everyone who drives slower than you is an idiot, everyone who drives faster than you is a maniac. So I've seen people who are like, no, we got to burn it all to the ground. And then I've heard folks who are like, no, we got to put the pedal to the metal and we got to go forward. And there are reasons both for caution and optimism. And my firm belief is that everyone else is either too cautious or too getting there. So maybe this copyright issue isn't as cut and dry. What about environmental impacts? Here again, math can help us. Did you know that training GPT-3 produced something like 500 metric tons of CO2? Sounds like a lot, yeah. The implication being that's too much. But is that a lot or is that a little? Let's take the least favorable evaluation of what LLMs are good for. Entertainment. Right? I mean, everyone wants to say they're going to cure cancer and everything. And a lot of people are just like, well, we're just making pirate poems. I really did like John's last year, the introduction with the Urich. I knew him well. That really sold it. But let's take entertainment as the comparison and compare this to the CO2 produced by a major motion picture. So Blockbuster comes in at 3,000 metric tons. Okay. Well, whenever you see big numbers in isolation, you should always compare them to something and sort of divide them by something. So here we're comparing. So let's divide these by people. Right. So GPT-3 first 3 months got up 100,000 users. Dune Part 2 first 3 months about 100 million users. Dune Part 2 first 3 months about 26 million tickets as far as the internet tells me. So that's interesting because, well, these numbers aren't exact. They're back of the envelope calculations, but one of them's a lot bigger per person than the other. And it's not what maybe you thought with that first headline. Now, I have seen some reporting about, obviously, the CO2 footprint of the entertainment industry. That's how I got these numbers. But that's not what I'm hearing about. So here, wow. But you might think, you know what? No. These AI models, they use energy when you ask them questions. So we got to take that into account. Okay, we can do that. Estimates I found, GPT query, 4 grams per query. Let's try to make it comparable with a movie. We'll say one query every 120 minutes, get it, 2-hour length for a movie. And so this gets us up to 480 grams per user, which is a lot more than the training cost, that 5. But if we do the same thing for movies, we got to remember this is the first 3 months is when people are actually going to the theater. They're probably driving. If we assume they're driving, maybe 3 miles there, 3 miles back, we get up into the thousands of grams. Okay. Now, not everyone drives the movies, and if you stream movies, if you stream movies, then it's like 220 grams per viewing, which is a lot closer to the GPT, which is really, we're just talking about cloud server and infrastructure here. But the point is, you have to ask compared to what, and when you do, things might not be so simple. Put another way, given that cheeseburgers produce about 3,000 grams of CO2, foregoing one cheeseburger would free you up for about 12 hours of GPT usage, or not quite 2 seasons of your favorite show on Netflix. So everything's a trade-off, and the math of prior examples make me question what most folks, well, it makes me question what some folks pushing hard against AI, if they're really clear about what it is they're upset about. You can do another quick example, and then we'll see if we can land this plane. So algorithmic risk assessments. As a former public defender, I want to remind you, anytime someone's held pre-trial, they're innocent, right? Innocent until presumed guilty. I mean, presumed innocent until proven guilty. And so that means that pre-trial detention is caging a bunch of innocent people. So it's not a punishment. It's a way of ensuring they'll show back up for. And in theory, cash bail offers an option for folks to, we'll give you some money, we'll give you our money, you'll let me go, and I'll come back for my money. That way, when you all come to court. So that's the idea, at least. So given this context, that we're jailing innocent people, and also it costs money to house them, this should be like a really simple, we'll just take care of this. Yeah. Some of you are more optimistic than me. So imagine you had an algorithm that could tell you whether or not someone was likely to come back to court. Well, you could hold these folks absent bail, let everyone else go and come back. Some places had started doing this, reducing the overall pre-trial detention. This is good, right? I mean, what could go wrong? Nothing ever goes wrong. Now, if I were one of the innocent people who would have otherwise been jailed, it seems like a good outcome to me. And it seems like there might be a lot more of those people than any folks who might have improperly been detained under the new arrangement, just because the numbers are so different. One might say these algorithms, well, they could be biased too, but people are biased. And at least in this arrangement, it's clear that it's better for more people. Algorithms make mistakes, people make mistakes. The important thing is that the arguments make less mistakes than the alternative. But people really don't like that as a justification. And to be fair, if I was representing someone in a criminal matter, I would object strongly, considering only the factors employed by these models. I'd point out that historically, these models, these exact same models, have been shown to be biased based upon their biased training data. And that if we're doing the moral calculus, I might find it objectionable that so there's this utilitarian measure of just because more of this population are helped, that we're going to sort of stick it to this other population, especially if that's been a historically marginalized group. So I do see a glimmer of hope here, because you can better maybe audit algorithms than say judges, but that's going to mean you actually have to open up the source of how people are making these things. And the big issue is you have to agree upon what's fair, which turns out there are mutually exclusive competing models for that. That being said, I'm interested in the nagging feeling that lingers, for me at least, even if I accept arguendo that this model is better than a person. So we'll just accept for argument that it is, and it can perform better on whatever measures. When I decide what fair is, it'll do better. So here's a telling passage from Noise. How am I? Apparently people are tracking my earphones. Okay. So one key insight has emerged from recent research. People are not systemically suspicious of algorithms. When given a choice between taking advice from a human and an algorithm, for instance, they often prefer the algorithm. Resistance to algorithms or algorithm aversion does not always manifest itself in a blanket refusal to adopt new decision tools, but often people are willing to give an algorithm a chance, but stop trusting it as soon as they see that it makes mistakes. So we expect machines to be perfect. If this expectation is violated, we discard them. Because of this intuitive expectation, however, people are likely to distrust algorithms and keep using their judgment, even when this choice produces demonstrably inferior results. This attitude is deeply rooted and unlikely to change until near perfect predictive accuracy can be achieved. That's great. What are we supposed to do about that? Actually, in the rest of the book, they say, well, work on your own decisions, make your decisions better. Don't leave them to machines, but make better of your own. But what bothers me about this, all we can do is wait until the machines are perfect approach, is that it writes off what genuinely to me seems like a really deeply held understanding of how people feel the world works. It also means we have to wait a really long time before we can use these models. We're waiting for them to be perfect. So a lot of folks make this observation and they assume it's somehow logical to ask, they assume it's a logical error to ask that machines be perfect. And for a long time, I have to admit, I felt this way too. That is until I stopped to more deeply consider the nature of machine mistakes. I suspect people don't so much expect algorithms to be perfect as they expect them to be consistent. And it is this belief in consistency which undermines one's trust. Here's another good pull quote. Unlike people, when algos show us who they are, we believe them. I like that one. John, you're my favorite audience member. Both people and their algorithms make mistakes. Algorithms' mistakes differ, however. They tend to make and repeat the same mistakes at scale. Individuals' mistakes tend to differ slightly from each other, and their ability to wield power, that is people's ability to wield power, is limited. To scale their impact, individuals must combine their efforts and their errors. If we're unlucky, collaboration collapses into groupthink. If we're lucky, however, different mistakes cancel each other out, and successes accumulate. This is the world we know, a world of protective randomness. Kahneman and company argue that getting rid of error makes things better, and they use this sort of traditional, target practice. We've got low noise, low bias, high noise, low bias, high bias, low noise, and high noise, high bias. And the assumption is that all things being equal, reducing noise will improve outputs, and this is true. One way to reduce noise is to aggregate a bunch of noisy answers. Here's the classic guess a cow's weight, which is the Dalton thing. What was that? Wisdom of Crowds, yeah, I loved that book. Now imagine the same group of folks is taking aim at a target. The average of all the shots is pretty good. That is the center of the dots. We sort of found their centroid. It would be a pretty good answer, just like with the guessing the cow's weight. We can remove the intra-shooter noise, and it becomes clear that averaging also helps us with bias, as long as folks are biased in different ways. Of course, one other way to reduce inter-individual noise would have been to pick just one shooter. Their shots would have been less noisy than the group overall, but this would have come at a cost of favoring their bias. Sometimes a little noise can be a good thing. Here I'd like you to consider their recent example. I think this is a great example. And then they had to go and mess it up. The Judicial Council of the United States. Remember how they announced a couple weeks ago that they would take any cases that were capable of triggering a national injunction, and they'd assign them randomly? Arguably, this was a decision that increased the variability of the potential decision, the noise, in the hopes of avoiding bias. So I could see an argument that it was focused on something else. Either way, it was ignored by some folks who saw their aim as true, and seems mostly to be a moot point now that's not happening. The thing is, bias looks like what you would expect if people were aiming at different targets. And life is often like that. Anyone who's negotiated a contract or drafted legislation knows that there's a value in intentional ambiguity. Sometimes the way to get people to agree is to get them close enough. algorithms and their outputs force us to be more precise. And maybe this is an opportunity for us to have some conversations that we have been avoiding, conversations that have been hiding behind a shared misunderstanding of what folks mean. Either way, precision and accuracy pair nicely with noise and bias. Precision is how exact you are. Accuracy is a statement about correctness. So here we have precise and accurate, imprecise and accurate, precise and inaccurate, and imprecise and inaccurate. It's easy to be accurate if you don't have to be too precise. In preferring accuracy over precision, we are acting as if we expect to be repeat players. We expect that we'll interact with these outputs again and again, such that the average will make sense to us. Now, about 5 slides ago, someone started going, no, 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 no. The entire point is that noise is the low-hanging fruit, and people worry too much about bias, overlooking the benefits they could get by simply reducing the noise. You're getting everything wrong. You can come talk to me later, but to which I'd say, I hear you, but what I'm trying to do is give voice to the unnamed objection I hear every time I try to systematically address people's expressed concerns. At some point, people just put up their hands and they say, no. I'm trying to understand that internal logic behind that objection, even if people can't articulate it. And I think it comes down to what classically has been called an explore-exploit problem. The classic example here is the multi-armed bandit. Assume you're in a casino playing the slots, that one of the machines pays out more frequently than the others, but you don't know which one. So it's all about what information you can get from your interactions. And when playing explore-exploit with algorithms, the expectation of consistency means that we have very little patience because we expect that repeat interactions won't give us much, if any, new information. Now, this is really funny. And this is the fun thing about these talks. You don't think about these things until they happen. It occurred to me that if this is actually how people approach AI outputs, it would suggest that they would be more forgiving of stochastic outputs, sort of random outputs, because even if it wasn't right this time, maybe next time it would be. And so I think it's really funny that when presented with deterministic machine outputs that are demonstrably better than the alternative, we lose all trust if it makes a mistake. However, when presented with stochastic outputs like that of GPTs that are demonstrably worse than the alternative, a lot of us are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'll just tweak my prompt. It's pretty close. Protective randomness assumes that noise is a means of exploration. The author Ted Chiang says that people's fears about AI are really their fears about capitalism. And my conjecture is that the incoherent fear of AI, what remains after addressing individual inarticulable fears, is the fear that we are losing the existing checks and balances. It's the fear that rule 1 will be violated and that rule 2 will only be considered for the input of some. It is fear that we somehow limiting the universe of possible answers. And the truth is we are. The question is that appropriate? So I think the answer to that question depends on whether or not you know the answer to the thing you're trying to model. And the less certain you are about the actual answer, the more noise has a role to play. So anyhow, is this idea of predictive randomness a useful mental model? I really don't know. I fleshed this out for today's talk because I'm not constrained in any way. I have no doubt that this will start, not end, some discussions. And I get the sense that compared to the we just have to wait to have perfect models, it has something to offer. But really, if you just take it all back, protective randomness is an argument for diversity, for pure research, for following one's curiosity. It's about exploring the possibilities and not assuming you know where best to look. What does it suggest? It suggests that, based as we are institutions of learning, with multiple responsibilities, tasked with the training of professionals, the creation and protection of knowledge, that we should do different things. On a large scale, I think it means we need to fight monopoly tooth and nail. Maybe Cali's a good place for that. Our fears about AI lacking protective randomness count doubly if all AI ends up being the same model dressed in different clothing. So maybe the people in this room are really, those are the big places we can fight. On a smaller scale, I think we need to push our students to use these tools to combat groupthink. This is something I'll talk a little bit. I have another session later in the week. But there's a whole slew of things you can do to use these tools in a way that pushes back upon the rightfully critiqued normal use cases. We should think about our scholarship. We need to be trying new things. The way to confront the unknown is to explore, right? This is the lesson taught to us by nature in evolution, right? Random variation. And in human laws by representative democracies, right? We get the ideas, the wisdom of the crowd, those different inputs. So with that in mind, I would like to come full circle and use some math to illustrate how powerful random exploration can be. It's not even half as rigorously connected to my arguments as the math you've already seen, but I do think it's beautiful. Here's a screenshot from a little program I wrote. What it does is it estimates pi. The way it does that is it says, well, you know what? If we know the area of a circle, we know the area of a square. If we take those two ratios, we can do some algebra, and we can find that pi can be approximated by multiplying the area of the circle divided by the area of the square and the circle by 4. If you have a very special set of a square and circle that, the circle and the square have the same width and height. And so what I did right before we got here is I had that running. Oh, it wasn't running it must have stopped running when I moved. I was hoping it would keep running, but it must have stopped running in the back when I had on the tab. Here is a calculation of pi using what I think is a really elegant estimate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to audio difference, your different sounds for inside the circle versus outside the circle. And actually speed this up. Restart it to do so. And all I want to say to you, and here's where I promised it would end good. Not good as in good, but it would end in a positive place. What I want people to do is go do random stuff. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
We're running out of time, but we have time for 3 quick questions. And then we're gonna break. 2 quick questions.
I stuck to my time.
John took too long.
3 quick questions or comments? 2 and a half.
1. Go.
I always hate it when there aren't questions.
People are still thinking. Anybody lost some race?
So in the back. I think it's a lot about precarity. And I think that it's about how precarious people feel. I think that's a very big part of it. I think that I could imagine a world in a different time, say the techno-optimism of several decades ago, where if this had come about, not in sort of the techlash sort of place that we are now, that the discourse would be very different, and there would be a much more positive discussion of things. And I think a large difference there is precarity, how people feel. I don't know. That's it. Most of this is vibes. This is that's the fun thing about talk like this. I just sort of can be vibes all the way down. All right. Yeah.
Just finished a book by Simon Winchester called Perfection. It's an outstanding book. It talks about the history of machines and perfecting them. But by the end of the book, you kind of get a sense that maybe we're working too hard to be too perfect. And that's just not a model that's going to sustain itself forever.
I think that's interesting. We all have experience, right, with the pandemic and understanding the fragility of overly optimized systems, right? So we get this in the in the supply chain. We took all the fat out, and then I'm not saying the pandemic was a little thing, but a change to the system that is unexpected can then throw everything out of whack. And if you don't have that slack, you don't have robust systems. And so actually, I feel this idea of protective randomness is it's their intuition about wanting robust systems, and probably an intuition developed from operating in social systems where the way you check an individual's power is with a lot of other individuals. I don't know. This is all fun. I get unconstrained in any way. I just it's 2 o'clock. I'm an undergrad. Let's just think about yeah.
About COVID and people's response when scientists say, "Oh, at the beginning you shouldn't wear masks. We need to hold up for people who are in the hospital." And then later they say you should wear a mask, and all of a sudden everybody's like, okay, well, this whole mask thing, wear or not to wear it, is up for debate because now scientists can't make up their mind and they should be perfect. And the greatest misunderstanding of what science really is.
Yeah.
The whole back process that is a problem at the level of people and power.
Well, so that goes back to the original point about this. I would like to live in a world where we didn't have two cultures, where there, the notion was that you actually, folks in the humanities understood the sciences and vice versa. And so I think a lot of that is, as you said, not understanding where the science, what is it to do science, and what does it mean when someone changes their mind? Like, that's the great thing about science, right? Is the fact that you can say, we thought it was this, and then we change. The best thing about that is you never have to be like, I'm wrong. You say, I was wrong, right? And that's just, that's a great thing. And a lot of people don't get that. And just like as a personal sharing, this is my first conference where I'm not wearing a mask. So I'll probably put one back on after I talk, but this is, yeah.
Last question.
Yeah.
Balance the humanities of law versus science of tech, and that's for us to do. So I'm going to go random stuff, like random stuff. What are some concrete things?
I'm glad you asked that, because I actually had something that I was hoping, I guess it wasn't explicit, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you a permission structure to go out there, and you know what? You can include some math in some of your discussion to people, and maybe you ease it in, and because it is a way of thinking. I mean, the examples I went with were things that I just, it's like, oh, well, where are the images? Well, I know some numbers. I can figure out where they must be. Oh, this is really bad for CO2. Well, I know some numbers. I can figure out where this can be. And those are things that I was able to do, on the back of the envelope to help orient my thinking. And so, I don't know, this was a very receptive audience for my message. So I guess I'm trying to give you the permission to go out and do this where it's not as easy. And then you can call me and we can commiserate. But one of the other things that I hope came through was that I think we need to really be thoughtful of CP Snow's bit was very, at the time it was very, it was very touchy. It's like, oh, science, we know better, blah, blah, blah. And then and it keeps going back and forth. And I just think that I hate to see people, it really is. It's the liberal arts. That's what it's all supposed to be about. And it's not two teams. We're all on the same team, Team Humanity. And math and science is just as big just as big a human achievement as any works of literature. And so go do random stuff and do math like no one is watching.
7 minutes left, 6 minutes left of the break, but we're not gonna delay. We want to stay on track. 5 minutes. So grab your coffee and run to your next session. See you at the planning.